But we have one testimony of a woman who was heading to university, and when she got to the checkpoint, and because of the structure of the checkpoint, it's closed. So nobody sees what goes on in there. So if you get into the checkpoint, nobody sees because it has, I can show you pictures, but it's closed. So it's not exposed to the public. So when she got in there, she said the soldier stood in a corner in which the cameras wouldn't videotape him. He knew which blind spot for the camera. And then he exposed his genitals, and he said, come take a look, come touch it, in Arabic. This is one of the cases we documented. But also I've talked to the women, and they said, yes, there's an infamous checkpoint in Hebron in which the soldier does that to women and girls who go through this checkpoint, and they started avoiding going to that certain checkpoints. We have similar cases in Jerusalem against schoolgirls, but this schoolgirl was molested, and she was touched by the Israeli soldiers at the checkpoint. And she's 14 years old. She was getting to the school, and they pretended to be searching her. They took her backpack. They threw everything on the ground. They started touching her breasts, touching her appropriately. And she said, I felt like this was not a proper search that we usually, and where's a female soldier to search me? And this girl's terrified to go to school.
So we will resume the hearing of the Commission of Inquiry and welcome our next participants. Would you like to introduce yourselves first? And then I'll invite you to make an opening statement, and I can ask you some questions arising from your statement after that.
My name is Kifaya, and I work for the Women's Center for Legal Aid and Counseling. I work on documentation of Israeli occupations violation against Palestinian women in the West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem. Is that enough? Or yes. Okay, thank you.
Hi, thank you for having us here today. I am also an international advocate for Palestine. I work for a Palestinian-based organization. We work domestically on making sure women and youth are included in decision-making processes. Internationally, we share the Palestinian narrative through a gendered perspective, so focusing on how women and youth are uniquely impacted by the Israeli occupation and Israeli violations.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Would you like to start?
Yep. Like I said, I work on the documentation of violations against Palestinian women and girls in the West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem. I go basically to the field, and I get to document and interview women who have been victims of international humanitarian law violations. For the past year and a half, we have been heavily documenting sexual violence against Palestinian women and girls in these areas. And I want to lead by saying why it's really difficult for us to collect testimonies, and maybe that we don't have as much data as we believe we should have because of the impact and because of the scale of violence and sexual violence that we have documented. Basically starting with the unique social stigma that we have in Palestine, which I believe the Israeli forces know of that, and they use it and they exploit it. And this is because even the terminology they use to violate and threaten with sexual violence and rape to men and women indicates their deep knowledge of the social stigma. And I like to read with the story of the Ajlouni family, which happened in July 2023. It's when Israeli forces invaded the home of this family, and they asked women under the threat of large dogs to undress. It was female soldiers, and they made the women walk around the house naked. One organization reported that, and they published that in a newspaper, and then the implication of that was quite catastrophic on the human rights, because we had an interview on the radio with one of the tribe leaders of Hebron, which is a prominent figure of the Hebron society, and the thing he said was, this was a scandal, and this human rights organization shouldn't have exposed these women in such matter. This is one of the reasons women don't talk, and it's also because they know that this would deny them from being able to move around. Their families would deny them to get to the university, to get to the schools, to get to their public daily life, if they know that they are likely to get sexually violated at a checkpoint, which we have been heavily documenting. One of the things that makes also men and women afraid to talk is the fear of reprisals and fear of retaliation by Israeli officers. We have been documenting tactics that have been used heavily to threaten these women. We have seen phone calls by prominent captains in the Israeli army calling these women on their phones, asking them not to share any information, and saying things such as, I saw you at an interview yesterday, if you do this again, you're getting detained again. And we have also documented cases in which women were detained after sharing their testimonies with us. One of the tactics also is being summoned for interviews. They call a woman and they're like, come over, we need to talk to you, and they use that to intimidate these women. Most of the women who were released following the last deal were threatened not to share any information about what happened in there to human rights organizations or to journalists. So it's been impossible to document all of that. One of the things also that I think makes it difficult for women to identify sexual violence is the lack of knowledge and lack of terminology. So we have women telling us that we had inspection devices inserted inside of us without being able to identify that as rape or sexual violence. It's mainly because the Jordanian Penal Code applied in Palestine identifies rape as only being done by a man through his body, so they don't even consider that they have been violated sexually, or they don't talk about it as rape. We have been able to document sexual violence in detention centers. Rape was mainly done by Israeli female officers inserting objects inside genitals. We have also been able to document a case of rape, gang rape, by two different soldiers twice on a woman from Gaza in a detention center, and she said she was filmed during this process. We have also been able to document sexual violence at checkpoints. In Hebron, in the H2 area, we have famous checkpoints now that women know that if you go through this checkpoint, you're more likely to see genitals of Israeli soldiers at this certain checkpoint, making women afraid to even go to work or to even get to schools at this point. We have also been able to document sexual violence while home invasions, nude searches with the intention to humiliate and with the intention of breaking the person, making them get naked in front of family members and do humiliating poses for the Israeli soldiers to see and film at this point. This is what I'd like to start with, and thank you for having us today.
So in the first year of the genocide on the Gaza Strip by Israel, our field workers all over the West Bank and the Gaza Strip have been collecting testimonies from released female prisoners. And what these testimonies reveal was a systematic trend of sexual violence that was being used as a weapon of genocide. And what's clear is that although these women came from different geographical areas, they were taken to different detention centers, the tactics of sexual violence that were used by the Israeli military were all the same. So it's very clear that it's happening as a matter of policy, and there's a directive to the Israeli military to engage in these methods of torture. And we see that sexual violence happens at the checkpoint, during home raids, it happens in Israeli detention centers, and it happens in Israeli prisons. I'd like to highlight 4 themes that is prevalent within all the testimonies that we collected, and it's sort of the manifestations of sexual violence and their effects. So first is sexual violence is used as a means to exert control not only of the female victim, but of her entire family, especially the male members in her family. For example, during home raids, when a woman is being detained, the male members in her family are taken to a separate room, handcuffed, blindfolded. And in some testimonies that we've collected, the female victim that is being arrested, the Israeli military will touch her inappropriately in front of her male family members. They'll make sexual noises and gestures, threaten to rape her even. And doing this in front of them while they're being handcuffed or blindfolded, not able to stop it, not able to protect it could be her daughter, sister, whatever it may be. It's a form to not only control the woman, but also control the men as well, and break up the family, and in turn break up society as a whole through these instances. The second theme is sexual violence is used as a tool to threaten the woman's honor and to shame her, and using basically Palestinian concepts of shame and honor against the Palestinian woman. Making her fear that she'll be socially stigmatized, and be socially isolated if sexual violence happens onto her, to fear her and to instill fear into her and make her comply. The third theme is we also see a widespread use of digital sexual-based violence and blackmail. So this can happen through photographing a woman in a compromising position. She could be nude, have her veil, her hijab removed, photographing her in humiliating ways, and then threatening to use those photos against her. And then the fourth theme I want to highlight is overall sexual violence in all these instances. First and foremost, it's being used as a means of humiliation and degradation. And that is clear all across the board. And sexual violence, our testimonies were compiled after October 7th, but sexual violence is something that's been happening historically against all Palestinians by Israel since the very founding of Israel. It is well known that in 1948, during the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, Israeli militia groups engaged in the rape of Palestinian women as a means to ethnically cleanse Palestinians. And in the decades since, sexual violence was always used against Palestinian activists as a way to get them to self-censor and not to be outspoken. Before I end, I would just like to state how we define sexual violence. So sexual violence can mean the forcible penetration either by a foreign object or the body part of another person. It could be forced nudity, inappropriate touching, beatings of the genitalia. It can also include acts which do not involve physical contact, such as photographing and compromising positions and or while naked, slut-shaming, and threats of rape. In all the cases we've documented, it's been violence that is humiliating or degrading in sexual nature. In the past, the UN has defined sexual violence in conflict areas as a form of political violence that not only maims individuals, but also is used to intimidate entire populations. And I think I'll end with that, and we're open to any questions.
Thank you both very much for your opening statements. I'd like to go back to a number of the matters that you raised and just receive further comments from you on them. Let's start first with some of the challenges in documenting sexual and gender-based violence. You've both referred to that. Could you say perhaps a little bit more about how your organisations have approached this issue, how it's been possible to encourage women to give evidence, what can be done to give them comfort, I guess, to provide them with protection so that they are confident to be able to give their testimonies because of the support of your organisations or others?
I can lead by saying, even though it's impossible, so we try like lots of tactics. So what I try to do is to get women who know these women to give them comfort. So we get a key person to contact them who they're comfortable with and to assure them anonymity. We have to give them so many assurances that this will be anonymous. They will not be, their names will not be published. The only woman who agreed to speak about her rape experience with her name mentioned, it's quite peculiar because she had a, let's say, a unique social status compared to other women. So some women were single, so they were hoping to get married one day, so they would not share their testimonies of sexual violence. Some women were married, they were afraid of their husbands or their husband's family because it has lots of social stigma and implications as well. So they're afraid they would lose that. But this woman, she didn't care, and I think she said because she was divorced, she didn't care. And I know it's quite weird, like because of the social structure in the Palestinian society, she didn't care. She felt like she had nothing to lose at this point. But what we try to do is to give them anonymity. And the difficulty when it comes to social stigma is research has been done with interviewing over 30 detainees, not by us also. They said that 70% of women who were detained never fully regained their social relationships because people say they might have been sexually assaulted in there. So you can imagine how difficult it is. This is what we do to give them comfort to speak about all of this. You know? But even though we get many women who refuse to tell us or to talk, even while being anonymous, with assurances to be anonymous at this point.
I'll also add on and say that in the testimonies we collected, we did so through the work of our field workers who are known in the communities that they live in. So that helps, that they're trusted and known members of the community. But also, despite that, women are still very, very hesitant to speak out and afraid of retaliation. They know that the perpetrators will get away with what they did, so they say, what's the point in even reliving this trauma and retelling it when they know nothing is going to come of it? Not only that, but they can also face retaliation by the Israeli army. The Israeli army always threatens women to scare them from speaking out. I'll say in our documentation, we had a woman, a case of rape by an Israeli soldier. Our field worker collected this testimony and shared it with us, with our team, and it's complete, anonymous, no names, no locations was stated, just the testimony itself. A couple days later, the woman contacted the field worker and she said, I want my testimony erased. I don't want anyone to know what happened to me. It was a very traumatic story for her, and she was afraid that some way, somehow, her family would find out. She didn't want them to know, and also the Israeli military would find out that she spoke out about it. So we had to, we can't share the details of her testimony.
You mentioned amongst the examples of women's experience, Israeli male soldiers exposing their genitals at checkpoints? I haven't heard of this before. How common is it? Is it particular checkpoints where this is occurring? Does it seem to be focused specifically on women, or this one's new? I'm sorry, I thought you mentioned it.
Okay. Yes, it is prevalent in certain checkpoints in Hebron. So, yeah. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the situation and how many checkpoints are in the H2 area.
Indeed, I've been to Hebron on several occasions, so I'm quite familiar with the nature of the place.
So I went on a field visit the other day and we had to sneak in because we're not allowed into the H2 area, and I had to talk to women, and she said that there's a certain checkpoint. If you go through that checkpoint, you're more likely to see genitals that day. And I verified that with other women that day on the same field visit. And I asked her, she's like, it didn't happen to me, but I know people who it happened to them. So they know women. But we have one testimony of a woman who was heading to university, and when she got to the checkpoint, and because of the structure of the checkpoint, it's closed. So nobody sees what goes on in there. So if you get into the checkpoint, nobody sees because it has, I can show you pictures, but it's closed. So it's not exposed to the public. So when she got in there, she said the soldier stood in a corner in which the cameras wouldn't videotape him. He knew which blind spot for the camera. And then he exposed his genitals and he said, come take a look, come touch it, in Arabic. This is one of the cases we documented. But also I've talked to the women and they said, yes, there's an infamous checkpoint in Hebron in which the soldier does that to women and girls who go through this checkpoint, and they started avoiding going to that certain checkpoints. We have similar cases in Jerusalem against schoolgirls, but this schoolgirl was molested and she was touched by the Israeli soldiers at the checkpoint. And she's 14 years old. She was getting to the school and they pretended to be searching her. They took her backpack, they threw everything on the ground, they started touching her breasts, touching her inappropriately, and she said, I felt like this was not a proper search that we usually, and where's a female soldier to search me? And this girl's terrified to go to school anymore. So depends on the situation, but I would say yes, there are infamous checkpoints.
Just going back for a moment to the one you mentioned in Hebron, over what period of time have you received these reports? Is this long-standing or a specific period?
They said there was an appointed new soldier after October 7th because they have changed a lot of positions. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And since we're on checkpoints, other findings you've made about conduct or misconduct by soldiers at checkpoints, can you tell us a bit more about that?
We haven't been able to document many cases because people go through checkpoints every day, and like I said, these women are afraid if someone knows about this testimony, their families wouldn't let them commute anymore, because we have documented that as well. In these areas which there are checkpoints, women are less likely to get an education, and women are more likely to get married early because their families would want to send them out of this area. But the testimony that we have collected is one testimony from the woman I told you about, and what women told us in the area about that. And they said they can't give me names at this point, but they know that of that certain checkpoints. It's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, we have testimonies of women who were taken at checkpoints, both in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. I'll talk first of the West Bank. Women who were just passing through, not suspecting anything, and then they're pulled over and arrested in very violent ways. We have testimonies of women who at the checkpoint having their outer clothing removed, if they were hijab, having their hijab removed in public in front of others. We have a testimony of a woman who was electrocuted or tased at the checkpoint. So these are things that happen in the West Bank. In Gaza, we have countless testimonies of women who were fleeing south through the Nazarim corridor, is that how you pronounce it? The safety corridor to go south. And they were taken at that checkpoint by Israeli soldiers, abducted in broad daylight, separated from their children, and just forcibly disappeared. And I could speak more about the conditions they were taken to, but that is something that was also happening in Gaza.
I need to add something. In regards to checkpoints in Gaza as well, it's like the same thing when it comes to evacuating from the north to the south. Women have testified that because the soldiers know that they have jewelry and they have it on their bodies, they have used that as an excuse to both loot them and molest them. So we have testimonies of that, 3 testimonies of women being looted because they know that women are more likely to carry the jewelry and the expensive stuff, and they would rob them and make them fully undressed and touch their bras and molest them in the way to get the jewelry and the expensive stuff out of their undergarments.
Organisations been able to keep field workers operating in Gaza over the last year and a half?
So our office in the Gaza Strip was bombed very early on in the genocide. However, our field workers have continued their work, and I mean, I don't know how, but thankfully they've continued supplying us with very, very important testimonies and documentation and conditions on the ground that we're trying to spread as much as we can.
Yeah, similarly, we don't have an office, but we have field researchers who continue their work. They had their houses bombed, so they had to evacuate. So they had more testimonies at the schools they were taking refuge in, and they have managed to collect the testimonies all the time as well. So, yeah.
So, a large store of information and documentation, right? And have you done anything with that in terms of promoting or trying to find accountability from the Israeli authorities?
We have been thinking about starting litigation in this manner, but with the new bills that might be enacted soon, like the ICJ laws in Israel now, and punishing people who work on it, and you can get to prison as well. So we're trying to cautiously navigate this. But on the other mechanisms, we have never been able to get any accountability whatsoever, so we know of that. So we haven't even tackled that at this point. What we try to do is advocacy and giving these testimonies to special procedures and try to talk about it as much as we can. But in terms of accountability, as my organization, we haven't. It's quite scary at this point because we can get our funding taken away, we can get our offices closed. So yeah, that's...
Accountability is unfortunately very difficult to achieve. I mean, us as an organization, we just share our reporting and advocate as much as we can and share it with the relevant international fora. But I think accountability needs to come from the international community, especially countries that are still supplying Israel with arms, political support, economic support, still engaging with them. Even despite the ICJ advisory opinion in the ICC case and all the calls of genocide, Israel's still being supported by so many countries. So I think that's where accountability needs to come from.
Do you know of any situation where one or more women have reported to the Israeli authorities acts of violence? What has happened to those reports, whether they've been investigated? No.
I don't know specific cases, but it is known in general that being tried in Israeli military court, Israeli soldiers are never held accountable. The conviction rate is 0%.
It's futile.
Yeah.
Can we focus on Gaza? Both of you have mentioned the sexual violence that has been reported in Gaza. Can you say a bit more about that, the nature of the violence, where it occurs, the circumstances that make it possible?
So we have documented that, I would say, in detention centers, women who were taken from Gaza, and they were taken to Sidoti Man. We have one woman, because it's infamous for having sexual violence in it, and it's for men. So this woman says she was taken to Sidoti Man, and she was nude searched over and over again and filmed, and then she was raped twice by Israeli male soldiers, 2 of them at a time, while videotaping her. We have also one testimony of a woman who was also taken. This is in addition to the threats of rape and the nude searches all the time with the intention to humiliate and to degrade these women. She says she was also raped by an inspection device by a female soldier more than once. They inserted the inspection device in her rectum. We have also one testimony of a woman saying that she was strip searched and they would beat her on her behind and they would humiliate her in front of each other. This is for detention centers. This is the most outrageous testimonies, but we have lesser details of humiliation and sexual violence over and over again, but this is the most severe ones. Also, when it comes to checkpoints, like I said, it's where the sexual violence happens and it goes unreported. So we have a testimony of a teenage girl who was made to undress a man because he refused to undress. They made her undress him, even though she's not related to him. She doesn't know who that man is. and while being searched and touched and molested on their breast and on their genitals as well. Most of the women also who were taken from Gaza, West Bank, and Jerusalem said they were beaten on their genitals, which has made us to conclude that there must have been a directive that's been given to the Israeli army to treat women in such manner, because in Jerusalem you're treated by completely different law enforcement than in Gaza or in the West Bank. But all these women said they were beaten on their genitals. This is for Gaza. This is what we could collect. But we're waiting for the women that were released recently to get more testimonies on this.
And I could just add on about the women who were forcibly disappeared in Gaza. Like I said before, it was usually as they were fleeing south through the safety corridor, they were abducted at the checkpoint. Many were taken to the Zakim detention center and the Negev detention center, and I'm probably saying those wrong, but at the northern border of the Gaza Strip. And it is known, and this is confirmed in our testimonies as well, that both men and women are put all together in one large hall, forced to strip completely naked and just sit in this hall, the women amongst each other and the men amongst each other. And it's also been reported and known that Israeli civilians are invited to come to this detention center and mock the Palestinian prisoners while they're naked, photograph them, and watch them as if it's a zoo. So that's something that we've seen. Other than that, there was just widespread use of forced strip search, inappropriate touching and groping of the body, sexual gestures and sounds, and threats of rape. Also using, the women who were fleeing with their children, threatening to kill her children if she didn't comply with them, if she didn't remove her clothes, they'd threaten to kill her children. And all these women were taken from detention center to detention center to detention center. They had no idea where they were going, how long they would be there, given no information, just kind of taken from one place to the next, and throughout the entire process being continually strip searched and touched and sexually assaulted.
Mentioned girls a couple of times. Are you seeing any different treatment for girls under 18 from adult women? Are they treated the same without distinguishing age, or how are girls treated by them?
I think the thing that I would say is girls are shamed more than older women are in terms of, we mentioned this earlier, being told that they're bringing shame to their family, they're bringing problems to their father's head, they'll never get married, they should just focus on getting married and having children and living a simple life. So being dissuaded from, I wouldn't even use the word activism, because a lot of these women, they're just posting on their social medias, maybe showing solidarity with what's happening in Gaza, and that was kind of the reason for arrest, and the reason during interrogation Israeli soldiers are warning them and threatening them with those posts. We see that towards younger women more.
The documentation we have is for 2 girls, minors in Jerusalem. We have 3 testimonies. One girl was sexually assaulted by settlers. And in most cases, even the soldiers would see that and the police would see that, they wouldn't do anything. So she was groped and touched by settlers. We have 2 testimonies. Girls were touched by Israeli soldiers while heading to schools. They were, like I said, touched on their breasts and on their genitals while pretending to be searching them. This is the testimonies. But when it comes to detention centers, they put women with girls together, so they don't separate them. We have a testimony of a woman who had a girl who had her first period in prison. So they put them together. They don't separate them. They don't treat them differently or better, if that's what you're asking.
So, they should be treated better under all circumstances with children in detention. The prison that you're referring to in the last situation, was that in Israel or West Bank? Was it military or civil? Sorry, you talked about the women, the girls who were placed in prisons at the same prisons.
No, it's
right.
in Haifa.
It's in Haifa. Okay, yeah. So it's up north. Are there within Israel specialised facilities for girls, or are they always detained with women?
I don't think they put them together. Like girls and women together. That's to the best of my knowledge on this.
However, there are many women who, before they were transferred to Damon Women's Prison, they were taken to detention centers that had both men and women, and they had criminals, both Israeli and Palestinian. So there are many cases where women were taken to cells that had men in them with no protection. And also, they would, while they were in these cells at this detention center, they would be repeatedly slut-shamed in Arabic by the men that were around them. And you know, we have one young woman who spoke of this, that this happened to her, and then when she was transferred, she just thought it was a coincidence that she had this horrible man with her in the prison at the same time that was slut-shaming her. But then when she was transferred to Damon, and she told the other woman there of her experience, they said, yeah, that happened to us too. So it was very clear that it happens intentionally as a method to psychologically break down the prisoner, the female prisoner.
Have you had reports of girls being detained in Gaza, or just women in Gaza since the 7 October?
We only documented with women in Gaza, but like the women told us that they were taken with girls as well. But we haven't interviewed girls in Gaza at this point.
Yeah, us as well. It's just women.
Can we hear from you about the impact of sexual violence on the victims and what the longer term consequences are for them?
I can start with that, because in areas like Hebron, like I said, we have reported women told us that they married their girls at 16 and 17 because they wanted them out of this area, that they have to commute through checkpoints all the time. Similarly, for areas, for girls in Area C, in which they get assaulted by settlers and they get these sexual slurs at them all the time, so they would rather send their girls out of these areas by marrying them to someone who lives outside of the affected place. Also, women not being able to commute to their schools and to their jobs because of that, because their families wouldn't let them, like, they would rather not have an education than have our daughter sexually assaulted at some checkpoint. This is what we have got on this. This is in addition to women losing their livelihoods and not being able to get there, in addition to social shaming. And because we have this case of this soldier who keeps harassing this woman, particular woman, and by sexually saying sexual insults, the whole community started talking about her in a way that she had to get her husband divorced her because of the talking and all of that. So it's a social impact that she couldn't deal with. In addition to that, this is in addition to the psychological harm and the way that you see it on these women, and you see it in their eyes when they talk, and how much they hesitate and how much they're traumatized, and they would never want to go through that experience ever again. And that's why we make sure they stay anonymous.
Just to speak of women who faced sexual violence from Gaza, it's very clear from their testimonies the amount of psychological and emotional turmoil that they're facing, because not only did they face these horrible violations, these sexual violations, while they were forcibly abducted, but also when they were returned to Gaza, what are they returning to? They're returning to genocide. They're dealing with starvation. Their homes were demolished. They're displaced. Members of their family were killed. So the trauma from the sexual violence, it becomes secondary, but it's still persistent there. Their first thing, it's a need of survival, number one. And so all this together, it's just creates a very, very horrible emotional state for these women who at the moment have no support.
And what do you see as the impact on the Palestinian community generally?
I think I understand sometimes the stigma. It's horrible, I know, but sometimes I think it stems from the fact that men feel emasculated in a way that they could not protect the women or the girls from all of that, and the way it leads them to, I don't want to hear about it. Also, with the thing is, I have 2 testimonies of women, because I include the social impact of the violation. What did you feel happened socially? So one woman said that her husband took her to a gynecologist to make sure she was not sexually assaulted in a way. We have a testimony also of a woman who was really happy that her husband didn't ask her if she was sexually assaulted, because it means that he doesn't think her honor was compromised. And I think this also, we have also documented domestic violence arising in areas in which there are these checkpoints. I know it's causation, correlation, maybe we can talk about this, but we have been able to detect that especially prisoners who get sexually assaulted, and the way it impacts their whole family. The family itself starts to suppress this person, stopping them from talking. We had a woman who shared her testimony with us, and then we published something about it online, with their consent, of course. And then we had her family contacting us, telling us to take it down. We don't want this to be known about our daughter. So I think it affects the whole family. It also endorses this culture because they're aware of it, and the terminology, like I said, they use indicates their deep knowledge of how much this subject is important. They endorse it. They make sure they exploit it to the extent that they can. And I visited Ofer prison, and I met with men who were also threatened with the rape of their daughters. I don't know how it impacts the whole society as a whole. Like, I can't do this social research and work on it, but I can tell you it's getting a lot of anger because it's a large scale, and people are getting so radicalized because of this. More women are talking now, more so than before, because of the large scale. Like I said, lots of women have gone through that. We had one journalist going on the media saying that this happened to her, the threats of rape, the nude searching. So women are talking, and it's getting people more angry, more radicalized, in my opinion.
It's very clear that the Israeli military is enacting sexual violence on Palestinian men and women as a means, as an attempt to break up the society as a whole. You know, when they parade men in their underwear in the streets of Gaza, shackled on the hands and feet, when they post photos of the lingerie of women online, you know, these are acts that are trying to humiliate the man, to emasculate the man and shame the woman, and in turn just try to break up the whole society. Has it been successful? I don't think so. You know, Palestinian prisoners have a lot of support from Palestinian society. However, it's you know, these are violations that are happening repeatedly. They're happening in the West Bank, they're happening in Gaza, and they have been for decades.
And in East Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
It's a dark bit, East Jerusalem.
Sorry?
It's been really difficult to collect testimonies from East Jerusalem. Like, it's the most difficult one of all areas. Women wouldn't talk. They're afraid because of the laws, the new laws. Even they would strip you out of your residency, out of your permit, out of anything you have to stay in Jerusalem. So women are afraid. So it's really impossible. So we get women, we give them assurances of anonymity. No one is going to know about this. They wouldn't talk. But in the West Bank and Gaza, it's way easier for these women to talk while talking to them. In Jerusalem, I need to spend a lot of time to get any data on this because they're terrified. We have cases of which 2 women, detainees, were exiled out of Jerusalem, and now they're sent to the West Bank. So people are afraid. Yeah.
Do either of your organisations collect information about these kinds of activities in Israel proper, across the Green Line? No? Right. I just wonder what the experience of Palestinian citizens of Israel may be in comparison with, say, East Jerusalem, West Bank, Gaza.
I have a testimony of a woman in Jerusalem, which is not East Jerusalem.
Yeah.
She was wearing green, and then she went to work at a daycare that was following October 7th, and then she had a female soldier asking her why you're wearing green today, and the girl said, "It's none of your business," and she detained her for that, fully stripped her, kept beating her on her genitals, like back and forth, and she would beat her and humiliate her for 4 hours. She said the cameras were recording the whole time, and then she sent her, then they were like, "Oh, you can go," and that's it. And this woman was so terrified of talking. We had to give her assurances, and for her to give her testimony. And she said that she knows someone else, but we tried to contact her. She wouldn't talk. They're afraid to go back and go through the same experience because in Jerusalem they have so much more to lose than in the West Bank. They have residencies, they have home demolitions as punitive measures. So even if it's you get away with it, your family is going to go through a lot if they apply for any permits to build anything. And we also have been documenting home demolitions as punitive measures against families in Jerusalem as well, in addition to revoking of residencies. And many people wouldn't talk because they're afraid they wouldn't be unified with their families if they have any applications. We have staff in our organization as well afraid for that. That's why we're really hesitant to move around with the litigation because they have applied for family unifications and they're afraid it would be rejected if they know that we're working on this at this point.
Do you have any information about the Golan? Golan? No? So that seems to be a bit of a black hole in terms of human rights information generally. So, okay, thank you for that part. My last question is just, what is the most effective way of dealing with these issues? We publish reports, we urge accountability, but we need to actually correct the situation, improve the situation on the ground. From your organisational experiences, what is the best way to make a difference?
Ask the Commission to me.
No, well, for your organisations first, let us learn from your strategies and successes.
I think it's more, we shouldn't just urge for accountability, we must demand it. You know, it's horrible that an entire genocide took place in the Gaza Strip and no one was able to stop it. There, like I said earlier, countries are still supplying arms and economic and political support. So demanding the complete arms embargo against Israel, acting within the advisory measures that were laid out in the ICJ advisory opinion, and just you know, demanding accountability on a state level from each state who is complicit in the continued occupation of Palestine. And I think now what's really effective is organizations that are enacting in litigation against companies and countries that are complicit in the occupation. So hopefully if there could be more momentum on that front, it might see an effect on the ground.
Have you been denied access to come visit the OBT?
Of course.
I mean, like, how can a state refuse to work and collaborate with the UN and at the same time still have a seat? That's to me what we try to call for at this point, because you can't pick and choose what you want when you want to have a voice or not at this point. And denial of like all of the special procedures to come and visit Palestine. We have had a meeting with Pramila Patten, who came and visited, and we hosted her in our offices at the time. And we got the organizations to come and share their testimonies. And even though we had a really tiny window of time, we tried to collect as much as we can, but we couldn't find women within a day or two to get them to talk about their sexual torture experiences in Israeli prisons. And for that, the report that she published was quite dismissive in a way. And it made people lose faith in us as an organization, let's say lose trust. It affected us so, I think, negatively in a way, because even women now don't talk to us anymore, not as an organization, but any organization that works in human rights. People are losing faith in the system. They don't want to give testimonies anymore. They think it's futile. And I know for your mandate, publishing reports and calling it what it is and saying the facts the way they are helps and goes a long way for that. And I think we should start tackling the issue of denial of access to all of the Commission of Inquiry and the special rapporteurs to the Palestine in general.
Well, for us from the beginning, there's been a significant legal issue there that the State of Israel, we acknowledge, has the right to refuse access to anybody. It shouldn't as a member of the United Nations. But it has no right to refuse us access to the occupied Palestinian territory. No right under international law at all to prevent a UN mechanism from going into Palestine. So this is a constant concern of ours that is legal and not merely political. I'm sorry, I do have one more question before we finish, and that's the impact on protecting women in Gaza, West Bank, East Jerusalem, of Western aid cuts. The United States' abandonment of international assistance has received the most attention, but we are seeing increasingly in European countries aid being cut. What have you seen yet impacts on women in Palestine of the Western aid cuts, or if you've not seen them yet, what do you anticipate seeing?
We have been able to document violence against women because they are less likely to get the aid, and even if they get in lines, it's physical, quite physical in some cases. They're less likely to get the aid that they need. We have been also documenting, following the cut of aids, even in the first period before the ceasefire, how women had more UTIs because they couldn't have access to anything, any sanitary pads, anything that could have been provided to them by the aid. And we're anticipating lots of violence in this case, and we have also been anticipating human trafficking against women and girls in Gaza. I know maybe you'd say it's less likely, but we have seen even publications on social media saying that in Egypt that now we get Palestinian women and girls in here and they're cheaper to marry and this has made us really scared of having a rise in that as well. But mostly we have been able to document domestic violence rise due to that.
And it's also important to note that it's not just the cutting of funding for international aid, but it's the deliberate blocking of that aid by Israel at the borders, which is happening until today, even after ceasefire. Humanitarian aid is still being blocked. And like my colleague said, it does impact women. They're more vulnerable to these to aid blocking, especially women who are pregnant, breastfeeding, women who need sanitary materials, hygiene materials. They can be more susceptible and more vulnerable to disease. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Something's quite like the social impact. It can be sometimes unique in a way you wouldn't even be able to detect it. So we have women who have lost family members, all family members, and they had to evacuate to schools, for example. And we have been able to document how men of that school would start to act like the guardians, like, where are you going? Why are you late? And we have documented so many layers of that, like things you wouldn't even think of how that impacted women who have lost all of their family members. And they had to live with other family members, like the uncles or far family relatives, and how they made them do lots of labor. And then the woman would feel like, okay, they're giving me refuge, they're giving me food, so I might as well just comply and do all of that. And we're anticipating more of this catastrophe, to be honest, if this doesn't stop.
Well, thank you both. Anything we haven't covered? Anything you'd like to add before we finish?
I haven't mentioned this testimony, but I think I owe it to her to say something. This woman was taken with her husband. She's given birth 3 weeks prior. She had a C-section, and she was staying at her mother's house because that's like it's a cultural thing. And then her home was invaded, and she was taken with her husband. And even though she repeatedly told them that she had a C-section, she had no involvement, and they were asking her, why were you having weapons? Why did you shoot at us? And she was like, I was at the hospital. And she showed them the scar. They kept beating her on her scars. She had to bleed. And then they sexually assaulted her in front of her husband to get him to talk and to confess about things. So they had soldiers unzip their pants and asking her to come sit on it in front of him. And they also touched her breasts in front of him. And they were both released like a week later. So no serious allegations were brought against them, nothing official. And then when I called the woman to follow up on the testimony, she said she was at the hospital because her husband, who's 35, has had a heart attack. And he couldn't handle the stressful situation. And sometimes it's really hard to cover all of these testimonies when we try to see the patterns and speak generally about it. But I thought I'd mention this one.
Where did that happen?
Nablus.
In Nablus.
Nablus.
Right, okay. No, well, thank you for that. It's, you know, we try to draw the patterns to look at the picture at a topper level, but it's the individual stories, the individual experiences of women and also of men and children that really form the basis of our work. And so hearing those is very important. Thank you for coming. Thanks for the insights you bring, but also the insights and work of your organisations, both of which I know and both of which are very important organisations. Thank you.